If you're filing back tax returns, or for that matter, any tax return after the required due date of that tax return, you need to make sure that you don't make these 5 common mistakes. They're very common. A lot of people make them when they're filing these back returns. The first one is to file too late to receive a refund. Now, you've already filed late, just don't file too late. Now, you have 3 years after the due date of the return, including extensions, plus 2 years after the tax has been paid, if that's the case in your case, in very limited cases, to go ahead and get that refund. So if you're filing a 2021 back year return, you need to make sure that you file it on time in 2025 before that 3-year statute expires. If not, you lose the benefit of that refund. Now, the second thing is to file more returns than what is required by the IRS. Now, if you have a ton of back year returns, like say it's 10, 12, 15 years of back year returns, and you're an individual, you need to follow an IRS rule called Policy Statement 5-133. This policy statement only requires you to file the past 6 years. So if it's January 21st, 2025, you need to file your 2019 through 2024 to be considered filing compliant from the IRS. Now, the IRS can deviate from this rule. Some businesses, this does not apply, but for individuals, that's the general rule, the past 6 years. So don't file more that's required. You'll go ahead and put yourself potentially in a position where you owe more than you should. Now, the third item is to omit income, right? So when you file a return, the IRS is going to screen that return, and you have to include all the income, including the income that is reported to the Internal Revenue Service. How do you get a copy of that income? You ask the IRS. You can go on your online account, you can contact them, you can get what's called your wage and income transcript from them. The wage and income includes all the W-2s and 1099s that are filed underneath your taxpayer identification number with the IRS. You make sure you report those and your other income items on your return to make sure that it passes IRS screening. If it doesn't include that, guess what? You're going to start receiving a notice or even get audited. Now, the fourth item is common for people to go ahead and do, especially if they're filing really old returns, and that's not confirming that the IRS has actually accepted the return. The IRS is going to screen it for income, like I mentioned. They're also going to do other screening items to make sure that the return is accurate. They could select it for identity theft. If it's a return that's more than 3 years, they're probably going to have to take a look at that paper return that's been filed and go ahead and scrutinize it even further. This can take months. You need to follow through to make sure that the IRS actually accepts that return. If you see some issues and some notices come up, you need to contact the IRS and resolve them quickly. Lastly, and this applies if you owe tax when you file a back return, which a lot of people go ahead and do, that is to not address that balance that you owe and not address potential failure to file and failure to pay penalties that you will have. How do you do that? Well, first thing, with your balance owed, you can either pay it or you consider one of the other IRS options, like a payment plan, or if you're in financial hardship, get into an agreement like currently non-collectible or an offer in compromise. One of those settlements, but you need to deal with a balance owed. If you don't deal with the balance owed, the IRS will proceed with collection and you could potentially face things like liens and levies. And lastly, penalties. When you file late returns and have a balance owed, you're going to get a failure to file, failure to pay penalty. If you qualify for first-time penalty abatement, go ahead and use that for the first year. If you have a reason outside of your control that caused you to file late, you may want to file for what's called reasonable cause abatement and have those penalties removed. Now, follow these 5 items in here. Don't make these 5 mistakes, and then you'll get back into filing compliance with the IRS and get back in good standing. And a lot of your fears and anxieties of I owe the IRS back returns will be over.